Welcome to the Nexus Project, a contemporary marketing conversation with John Ghiorso.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nexus Project. I'm your host, John Ghiorso, and on today's episode, we have Jessica Michaels. Jessica is the founder and CEO of a Seattle-based agency called Bread and Butter that focuses on brand development and works with really a blue chip list of companies. She deals with the future of working, living, learning, and computing, and works with Microsoft, Intel, Amazon, P&G, and many others. She's been, multi-decade career in marketing. She's an advocate and mentor for women in leadership, board member, advisor, author, and frequent speaker on topics like leadership, entrepreneurship, innovation strategy, and creativity. So we have a really interesting conversation that jumps around to a couple different big topics in the industry right now. We talk quite a bit about generative AI and its impact on agencies and the future of marketing and branding and strategy. Jessica has a very interesting novel take on this technology and one that's really grounded in actually deploying it today on behalf of her clients. We talk about the cookieless future. We talk a little bit about Gen Z and their sort of atypical habits and views towards brands, which I think is super relevant for anyone who's selling product or service to a Gen Z customer. And then we get into some kind of rapid fire questions around, where she's a contrarian, most overrated and underrated trends in marketing, and some other kind of twists and turns. So I think this is a great conversation. It should be super valuable for anyone interested in these topics. She's really a blue flame thinker around a number of big, important trends in the marketing industry today. So without further ado, here we go. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive right into it. I want to spend a lot of time talking about generative AI. It's kind of the big topic in our industry right now. Just to kind of set the stage, where do you sit maybe on a 0 to 10 scale? 0 being this whole thing is overhyped. 10 is it's going to change everything. Do you have a perspective on kind of your POV there?
I do, actually. It's kind of twofold. So to answer your question, I feel that I don't actually think it's overhyped. I think there is a lot of excitement, negative and, positive excitement around it. But I do think it's transformative. I think it is going to change things in ways that we can't predict and in ways that we indeed can predict and already are experiencing within our industry. I think some of the overhype, if there is any, is around the negative sides of it, which I am not a big proponent of. And I see it more as this new technology is our friend versus our foe. And we just need to do a little bit more due diligence in terms of how to work with it. But no, I think it's exciting. I think it is positive change. And I think there's a lot unknown.
So then kind of another big question here. What do you think happens to the agency world? In particular, what you're involved with, creative branding, 5 years out when this technology it's I think admittedly clunky right now.
Sure.
It's like interesting and compelling, but it's imperfect.
Absolutely.
I think it's based on the speed we're running. A couple of years from now, it's going to be pretty close to perfect. How does this impact agency world? Like, do agencies fundamentally change? Well,
I just got back from a week in Sydney and I was down at the first South by Southwest in Australia. They've taken it out of Austin for the first time and they hosted the event down in Sydney and it was fascinating. And I was down there speaking on a number of different topics, but there was a really great discussion by David Droga, actually from Droga 5, and he's now over at Accenture Song, and he talked a lot about the transformative nature of technology within our industry and that sort of Gen AI is just the next iteration of that. And there's been a lot of things that has changed agencies right from the beginning from copywriters to telex machines to fax machines to computers. There's been all of these changes since the beginning of our industry, which was, 50, 60, 70 years ago, maybe longer for some parts. And I think this is another one of those changes. And I think, therefore, it will make agencies have to adapt. We're going to have to think differently, and our skill set is likely going to have to change in terms of our ability to leverage that technology to be valuable to our clients. I think, frankly, some of the feelings we're already having is more on the creative side of the agency world versus the strategy side, although I think there is use cases, benefits, and sort of pros and cons for both. But on the creative side, our entire creative team at Bread and Butter has now got quite a lot of experience creating with AI. We are using it for concepting purposes. We are using it to test and try ideas. We are using it to put in front of clients to show variation and options in sort of a velocity and sort of a breadth that we've never really had before. And we're able to do that quite efficiently and at scale. I think the shift for us right now, and that we're sort of still figuring out, is how we leverage a lot of this opportunity around Gen AI from a creative standpoint in market, because there's still a lot open around the legalities, what you can and can't use, what information is the right information for these tools to be ingesting. I think Adobe and some of these bigger companies are doing a really good job at trying to put a walled garden around the content that they're using to inform their AI solutions, which gives me, as someone who's responsible for brand narratives, a comfort that what we're using is okay. But I think some of these other tools, Midjourney, etc., that have less rigor around how they're being governed, gives me a little bit of pause as to how we use these technologies right now. I kind of want to see how the world shakes out a little bit before using them really at scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, assuming that the legal side will get figured out here, and I think it will.
And it will.
Let's say in midterm, 5 years from now, future. I don't know that that's going to be a concern. I'm sure there'll be some big lawsuits, and it'll shake out one way or another. Like, one of the ways that I view generative AI currently is it creates potentially at least creates a massive efficiency gain in asset creation. So there's been a lot of talk in the industry about that, and I think that's important. But for me, that is almost inevitable at this point. Like, it's just a matter of everyone kind of sorting out the tech and the process side to really enable that efficiency gain, which I think a lot of that is kind of partway through. But once that happens, I think it will. What are the new opportunities that open up from your perspective? If a given copywriter or graphic designer, kind of the creative, the production side, gets a 1,000x increase now in the assets that they have to play with, what do you do with that? Because I think that's the conversation that isn't happening as much as it should. Because to me, that's where the value is ultimately created. Otherwise, we're all just optimizing to zero. Basically, we're just just creating so much efficiency that our industry just effectively has zero margin and goes away. So there's got to be a next thing then. Any perspective on the next thing?
I mean, I love that question, and no one's asked me that question. The first thing that kind of came to mind is, in a funny way, I feel like it democratizes the idea game, meaning the tools are so relatively easy to learn and use. Truly, you're not writing code to do this. It is prompts and suggestions and questions and answers. And because of the nature of the usability of some of the tools we're using in AI in our industry, I think it is democratizing the creative process, meaning particularly in our agency, we have strategists, creatives, and ops people, and our strategists and creatives work really, really closely together. And we always say, doesn't matter where the idea comes from, we want everyone to be thinking and doing. I think the fact there's an opportunity to potentially have non-traditional creative thought be empowered by AI means that there's an opportunity for the growth of strategic ideation, creative concepting to come from more places on the agency side. To others, it may sound like we're sort of moving away from specialization and more into a commodity play, but I actually kind of challenge that. And I think, no, I think it actually means that we are giving tools and access and assets to people who are really creative, but perhaps haven't grown up in that sort of career path, and that they can start to almost prototype their ideas and have a seat at that table in a way that perhaps 5 years ago they would never have been able to have in more traditional agency roles. And for someone like me that sort of has built a business challenging the status quo of how agencies are built, I kind of really like this notion. And I think that's why I see these technologies, particularly AI, as a friend versus a foe. Because I think if you can figure out how to use this incredibly clever technology to support the work that you're doing to provide value to clients, because ultimately we're in the client service industry, then it's a win-win. So yeah, I think that's where I see really big change over the next 5 years. And I know that might feel a bit, I don't know, have some sort of tension with the creatives that might be listening to our conversation right now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea. I think it was Sam Altman or some important person in AI, said that one of the ultimate results of generative AI will be separating creativity from technical skill. So, right now you could potentially be, a Beethoven, genetically Beethoven, but if you've never trained on how to play the piano, you can't do anything with that innate skill because you don't have the technical ability to put it out into the world.
Correct.
Art, film, literature, all these things potentially are at play where you can take kind of raw human creativity, and creativity maybe in an artistic sense or a strategic sense, I think both potentially play, but you don't need that technical skill necessarily because it's all natural language. You can just explain what you want to see or hear or experience. And I'm trying to wrap my head around how that impacts an industry that's kind of based on the pairing of both the strategic kind of innate humanness and the technical skill, because there wouldn't have been a point to separate those up until very recently.
Absolutely.
Is that a good thing or bad thing for the agency world? I don't, what does that do? I think it's good for humanity, but from a business perspective, go ahead, please.
I feel that the agency model, and you and I have talked about this before, but the agency model is a little fragile in terms of the actual business that we're in. If you sort of told someone, I'm going to get a bunch of people together that are pretty creative and got lots of good thoughts, and we're going to charge this amount of money, and we're going to go tell the C-suite of Intel and Microsoft and Amazon what they should be doing with their media dollars, and how that, people would kind of look at you and go, that's a business? I don't really understand how that works. You're not making anything, you're not building anything, you're not necessarily selling anything that is tangible, right? So it's an odd business to be in the first place, because it is a business based on ideas, and frankly, again, I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me, but based on intuition and imagination, I really feel that particularly strategy, which I believe is where most of, particularly in our world, in our client world, but most of our clients are paying for that. They are paying for someone to help them think differently about a problem and then help them go solve that problem in some capacity. And I think I think that skill, the ability to ideate, the ability to imagine what could be and then build a work back schedule to that point in time, is always going to be valuable and is always going to be a necessity in business. Whether that is something that is a pure agency model or it is something that sits in-house at a brand remains to be seen. But I do think it's really hard to have perspective when you're in something, and that's why I believe the agency model will always survive, because I truly believe that outside perspectives, sort of separation of thought, separation of church and state, and how you approach a situation, and this notion of mentorship and having someone that may know more about a specific topic come in and help you do your job better, that to me is always going to be valuable and have a role in the world. I think the tactical part of our jobs, the making and building of assets and the writing of copy and the creation of TV commercials and video content, that's the stuff. Photography, all of those things we're talking about a lot now. Like, what does the next year, 18 months, 4 years, 5 years look like? And how are we going to make and consume content? Because again, there's never been more content in the world than there has today. And it's only increasing, right? Who's making that content? Where's that coming from? So I think there's a lot of conversation around that piece. And I do believe that the ability to generate revenue off the making of assets is going to be more challenging, because we are getting so efficient with the making of assets, thanks to AI, but also just thanks to different ways of approaching creative in any way, shape or form. And a lot of it's due to social media and our ability to use, our phones to create content that actually looks wow and valuable. So that's the part that sort of a long-winded way of saying, I don't think the strategy part is going to change, or the ability to imagine and ideate and use intuition to drive value. I think the making of things and content, this is where we're going to see the fundamental shifts. It's not going to go away, but I think it's going to be a very different playing field than what we've been used to for the last 20 plus years.
Yeah, I think the nuance there is super important. And the strategy piece, to me, is the one that AI is nowhere near being able to replicate. I mean, I've tried.
Sure.
And lots of people probably played with these tools and tried to get it to come up. It just isn't good. Maybe we're in some AGI future 10 or 15 years from now, and then really all bets are off, because then you're basically saying it can do anything any human can do, which that's science fiction, and who knows what happens then. But I think from a practical perspective, it's very clear that some of the things that agencies do are going to be completely disrupted and replicated by generative
100%.
AI in the next year or two, if not already.
Yep.
And then it kind of goes back to that idea of separating human creativity from kind of the technical skill set. I think the technical skill set stuff is going to get effectively eaten by software, but the human strategy and creativity side, maybe, but I haven't seen anything that's really, frankly, even close to replicating.
Because
at this point, it's all very derivative. So
yeah, I think so too. And I think there is a margin there, right? There's real value in someone coming in and helping you think through a problem and helping you find that solution. And that's time that you're paying for. I mean, I think I just was talking about South by Southwest, but I spoke on a panel at South by Southwest in Sydney called The Future is Female. And it was about empowering women in technology, and particularly women founders who wanted to go start agencies or startups, particularly in the technology space. And I think what was really interesting is this notion of mentorship and community that came out loud and clear in that conversation. And I kind of liken it in the same way to strategy and the ability to support clients at that level, because in order to start a business, you know what that's like. One of the things you need more than anything at that time is mentorship and someone saying, hey, I did this before. Why don't you think of it like this? Because so much of being an entrepreneur and a founder or an agency owner is going, I've never done that before. I'm going to figure it out as I go. And I'm going to run with it and hopefully make a good decision and make it work, right? So I think the same applies, frankly, in the agency space. Like, we are advising CMOs, CEOs, CTOs, CSOs of all these companies, right? These sort of people that have big jobs, that have a lot of budget that they need to spend, and a lot of people that they need to take care of that work for them. And they need to make sure that they are getting the right advice, that they are asking the right questions, and they don't expect for a second that they know all the answers. And that's, again, where this strategic thought and mentorship, consulting, whatever you want to call it, comes in. And it's also why I think a lot of the consulting companies are still doing really well, even with a lot of this disruption, because they are providing that value that is so needed for companies large and small across the board. And the pieces that are becoming questionable in terms of their value, even though there is still a deep need for them, are the asset piece, are the things that we used to build, make, and do. There's still a requirement. They're just seen as less valuable, and therefore the cost to make them is going down, down, down.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about, cookies or lack thereof. We talked a little bit offline about this, but what's your perspective on kind of the cookieless future, maybe not even future, maybe kind of cookieless today that we live in, and where it's headed? Overall, what's your take on this and how it's going to change kind of the work that we all do?
I think there's a lot of noise around this personally. And I think it's noisy because I think people, frankly, more the media players than brands, have been reliant on cookies to help them build their businesses and make money. And I think the brands, particularly over the last 5 years, and the big brands that we work with at least, sort of are questioning how much value they're really getting from a cookie-based media model. Meaning there is so much other data that they can use today to inform their marketing strategy, to inform their media buys. The contextual relevance of their own websites now is providing them so much information that they've never had before. A cookie is a piece of that conversation, and it is useful and has been, and it's allowed companies to spend money for a return on investment that has been benchmarked for the last 10 years so they can track. But I don't think cookie-based data is the future. I think it will go away. It hasn't gone away yet, but it's going to go, because I think it's going to be seen as a dated way of ingesting data and tracking, frankly, users across sort of the digital ecosystem. And I think there's so much noise about what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Where are we going to spend our money? And to me, that's the wrong question to be asking. The question you should be asking as a brand owner is, okay, we have all this other data, sales data, vendor-based data, all the data. I mean, gosh, John, that, you absolutely were well aware of, particularly with your work with Amazon.
Yeah.
That's the data that should be informing where you're spending your money. And you should be using that, not just cookies, to inform that media buy. So for me, I think there's a lot of noise. I think it's dated technology that still has relevance and utility today. I do not believe that will be the case, possibly even 3 years from now. So I think we are moving into a cookieless world. I just don't think the drama around it is warranted, because I think we have a lot more information that we can use to help build our audiences and build the work that we're trying to do.
So as the industry then goes through this transition, who are the winners and losers? And is it platform companies? Is it a specific type of brand, or brands with specific approaches to the market? And who's on the other side of that? Because it's going to shake some stuff up, right? It won't just be status quo.
When you say winners and losers, give me the context. Like, winners being,
I mean, does this make does this make platform companies more important? The walled gardens, do they become more important? Does it mean that, brands that kind of own their own community and audience and email lists and direct consumer sites are the ones that win versus the ones that rely on the other gatekeepers to kind of push all their business through? I
don't know if I've got all the answers to that one, but I think any company or brand that has a direct consumer relationship in whatever capacity they have, that opts out of having the middleman, or maybe has both, is going to win, because they're going to understand who they're talking to and what their needs are of their customers, clients, whatever they may be, better than anyone, because they have a direct line into those people. So for me, I feel like those who stay invested and interested in not relying just on sheer cookie-based data or even platform-based data, or putting all their eggs into one basket as it pertains to where they're spending their media dollars. I truly fundamentally believe that diversification and the ability to understand their audience directly and working hard to build up that relationship, whatever that may look like, they'll succeed, they'll win. I think the ones that rely very heavily on, we have this much money, it needs to be spent over here, it's going to return this much in investment. Although I understand with some of the bigger companies, they have to do that to some level. They ultimately, in my opinion, will probably lose out, because I don't think it's enough anymore just to make a product and sell it. I think there needs to be a lot more thought from what customers need, what clients want, what your ESG policy is, how you are seen in the world, how you are showing up. I think brand loyalty is at all-time low. So how do you, if brand loyalty isn't a thing anymore, how do you actually keep your audiences engaged or indeed coming back for more? There needs to be more digging and due diligence done. And it's not as simple as it used to be of, I'm going to spend some money, I'm going to buy an audience, and hopefully that will give me something. I think that's almost lazy.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good transition then into a question I had around Gen Z. But as a personal aside, I don't know about you, I kind of felt young up until a few years ago, because I was basically in the young, I was wearing the same stuff that a 25-year-old would wear, and I was listening to the same music. And I'm 38, and I genuinely now am starting to feel this weird thing, like I'm a genuinely different generation than someone who's 22 years old. And I look at them and I don't understand what they're wearing and what music they're listening to. It's all very confusing to me. So Gen Z, I think, has a strange, atypical maybe is a nicer way of saying it, at least from what I'm used to, way of thinking about and interacting with brands. And we talked about this a little bit, but you have a super interesting take on this. So what are they doing? How do they work?
So I've already rolled over into the 40-something era. So I definitely feel that and have felt that. And funnily enough, one of the ways that when I started feeling that about 38 was like, I'm not like the cool kid anymore that I thought I was. And I need glasses to actually read a menu. So there's that. One of the things I did, and I made sure I did, and I actually, if anyone sort of asks me how you've built a business that has longevity, this is quite legitimately my one response, which is I have taken an active role in mentoring a number of Gen Z people coming up in our industry. And one of the reasons I do that is because I am completely fascinated and almost at times shocked with how they respond to so many things. And if I don't stay curious and understand the generation that is, the next generation or current generation of consumers, what does it really mean to build lifelong value with this generation? Because I genuinely don't even know if that metric makes sense for this generation. There's so many questions. And in order for me and my business to stay relevant. And I think relevancy is a really important KPI for an agency. And in order for us to stay relevant, it's really important that we understand Gen Z. And I try not to judge it. I try to, in the lovely words of Ted Lasso, I try not to judge. I try to stay curious because it is so different. And I think what I've learned through my many conversations with incredibly bright, talented, young 20-something adults that are sort of exploring the world for the first time. Some went through college, some have not gone through college. A lot of people in that generation I've spoken to don't value college like we did. They don't value the same hierarchy and infrastructure and, frankly, just ways of being in the professional world that we did or that we were raised on. And I'm intrigued by it because they seem to have a deeper understanding of what one of them called wealth creation, which I thought was a really interesting notion for a young 20-something person to be talking about wealth creation at that age. And sort of when I pushed him on this, he mentioned, my generation has seen that perhaps a salaried job isn't the only way to create wealth and to maintain a lifestyle. And that for us in this generation, we like the idea of running our own business, having our own ideas, creating our own money, our own sources of revenue versus relying on a larger company to do that for us, or having both. And I think the fact that they're already asking themselves that question at this age is incredibly motivating to me because it says that they're really hungry and ambitious and willing to do the hard work to try something, to take risks and to do all of those things versus getting on sort of a professional track that perhaps they sort of felt that they were forced to do. So they're really questioning a lot of, I think, the principles that we essentially built our careers on and that we grew up in. And that includes coming down to the way they feel about brands and brand loyalty. And I don't think they wear brands as a form of pride or even cultural equity. I don't think they see it in the same way that we did, which is fascinating.
Okay, so talk more about that because that's super interesting to me. I mean,
jumped around.
They're buying something, right? They're picking a shoe to wear. They're picking a jacket. At some point, they're going to pick a bank to use. They're going to pick, what airline to fly on. If they're not using brands to sort of tell themselves something about themselves or tell other people something about themselves, and maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but then how are they making those decisions? Does it literally doesn't matter? Like they're just saying, well, it's this price and that's all I care about and the brand is meaninless?
But then it still matters, right? Because it's the price. It's a price conversation.
That's the irony of it.
Yeah. I mean,
or is it the brand that's actually kind of signaling this is the brand that I don't care about brands, so I wear this brand, which is still is still a way of signaling, right? Like, I wear Crocs because I don't care about. Yeah. Anyway.
I really actually struggle with that trend in general, the Crocs trend. I've never understood that, right? But it is such a wildly successful brand.
No offense to any Crocs people that are listening. Yeah, good for you. I don't get it.
I wear Birkenstocks. Maybe you don't wear Birkenstocks. I get it.
Okay.
I do live in Seattle after all.
Yeah, fair enough.
I honestly think it is harder for Gen Z, more so than our generation or even generations that have gone before, to create individuality or the ability to sort of create who they want to be, their own persona, because every day in the world of social and digital, so many of those personas have already been explored, right? And so I think there is a generation that is really trying to find their place in the world and to put a stamp, put their mark in the world. And I think the ability to see and learn and adapt around multi-generational trends from the 70s and 80s and 90s, like all of those trends have already existed and now they are there to be viewed and understood online. So you've got so much exploration that happens at such a younger age that it has to be pretty overwhelming to be like, who am I and where do I fit in and what does it look like when I have pretty much all the options under the sun? And so I feel that generation in particular has so much more information than we ever had. And how they distill that and then how they use that to inform their decision making is obviously going to be the part that they can control. And I think they see some of, frankly, the decisions that maybe we made as millennials and Gen Y as a little bit, fluffy or not relevant. I think they're more focused on, I'm going to be less concerned about the bag that I'm carrying or the shoes that I'm wearing, to give an example. And I'm a bit more concerned about the environment and where we're going and what we're doing and what we're going to do to protect our generation and the generation that comes behind us. And how do we help fix the problems of the future? And I don't think there has been a generation before this that has thought as intently on these issues as this generation are. And so I feel, in spite of the fact they're in their 20s and having fun, there's a seriousness to this generation that is like, yes, I want to fly on that airline, and yes, I want to wear those clothes, but it's not going to define who I am. And I'm intrigued by that because it feels kind of mature in some ways and sort of before their time, really, to be thinking and talking about these things.
Yeah, it sounds like they're pretty worried is what it sounds like.
Yeah, they're worried about wealth creation.
Maybe that's fair. But...
And they're worried about the world. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Interesting. So the brands that can, and I'm sure, authenticity here becomes a super important component of this, but the brands that can authentically kind of, help associate with those more, I guess, altruistic, maybe not the sort of standard kind of signaling mechanisms inherent in a brand. Because it is still signaling, right? You're still signaling something about yourself. That, well, I wear these shoes because they're, zero carbon,
absolutely,
whatever, right? It's just a different signal maybe that they're attaching to.
I think you can't avoid that. I think it's part and parcel of living in the world in which we live in today. I just think they care a little less about the things that we perhaps cared about in terms of signaling value to the world.
Yeah.
And I think they care about things that perhaps our generation hadn't even thought about, which I think is also, we're thinking about it now. But I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tricky. It's tricky for a brand that has to figure that out. And it shakes things up. All right, cool. You want to go to the rapid fire? It's not really that rapid fire, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I can't remember the questions either. So this is like first time.
Okay, they'll surprise you. All right. Okay, number one, in a business context, what do you believe deeply that most people disagree with you on? Basically, where are you a contrarian?
Gosh.
Yeah, it's hard.
Honestly, in so many aspects of my business life. I mean, I think I've almost built a career on challenging the status quo and challenging the way things have been done and challenging norms. And not just to be divisive or to cause a stir, but because I feel and see acutely where perhaps there's been ways of behaving in business that were not satisfactory, that could be improved upon or could be optimized upon, particularly in agencies. Some of the larger agencies that I've had experience working with struggled to be efficient in the work that they did and to maintain both a healthy business, but while also making sure that they were being fair and equitable to what they were charging clients. And it's such a balance, right? And not one that I think bread and butter necessarily gets right every day. But I really challenge the notion of having multiple people on a team on client work, for example, and multiple people involved when really what you need is 2 or 3 strong thinkers, leaders and doers to get something done. And then that's all the clients are paying for. So I believe in really efficient teams led by senior people who understand the task at hand. And it doesn't mean that more junior people can't work and learn and come up in the industry. But our business model sort of relies quite heavily on that sort of proponent. And I think that's a little bit contrary to how the traditional agencies have worked in the past. And I think the other thing that I really do believe in, and I know people disagree with me on this, is I really do believe that, and it's kind of a reason I don't really like job titles. I struggle with job titles, and I also struggle with things like timesheeting, because I don't necessarily believe that a job title is a defined role that you have within a company. And I think you can play lots of different roles and provide lots of different areas of value. And I want to make sure my business allows for that and allows for shifting and changing of people's professions and professional fancies as they go throughout their career. And I think the timesheeting thing, this management of time piece in the creative space, I think is completely disastrous, to be honest, because you can't... I don't believe in sort of times money
time equals output,
value,
time equals value.
Right? Like I fundamentally don't believe that. And I understand fiscally, and to be fiscally responsible, particularly when you're working with a lot of these larger companies, sort of the Fortune 50 companies, they need that reporting. They need that level of understanding to make sure that there's no bad actors and that people are behaving. And I understand that rigor. I think it's an incorrect way of measuring value and success. And we are at Bread and Butter proactively working on how to untether ourselves from a billable hourly rate and to think about value as the content of ideas and the output and the success of that output and the return on investment to our clients versus what were we able to get done in 18 hours on that particular task. I really struggle with this notion, and a lot of people like it because it gives structure to their day. And so perhaps I prefer chaos to order, but I find chaos to be a pretty incredible motivator to change things and get things right.
Yeah, well, if that's a contrarian view, then we're both contrarians on that last point. So yeah, so at least there's someone else out there that agrees. That's great. Okay, so 5 years from now, what emerging platform will marketers regret not paying more attention to? So if you're going to play the stock market here, maybe literally, right? But like on a platform company, which one do you think is poised to be the next kind of breakout success? By the way, if you said TikTok in 2018, you would have been very correct. So kind of what's that next big?
I don't think we know what it is yet. I don't think it's here. I don't think it's here.
Okay.
I think we're seeing...
I mean, you don't think it literally exists. Like it doesn't exist. It's going to be created this year, next year, the year after.
Here's what I think. I think and when you're talking platforms, John, I'm assuming you're talking sort of the big social platforms and the Twitters and the Metas and the X's and the Metas, etc.
Correct. Big or small. Yeah. But what's going to be the biggest kind of trajectory of the next?
Yeah, I think we are I'm serious. I feel I'm old enough now to have seen a number of decade iterations. And sort of every 10 or so years, we see sort of a new wave of platforms or technology or new ideas. 10 years ago, it was social and emerging media. And 10 years prior to that, it was websites and mobile websites, and this notion that you can have a website that you can look at and view film trailers on, right? Like it has moved really quickly. And now we're kind of, I think, coming out of this first, you could even call it the second wave, maybe MySpace and, Napster and those kind of things are the first wave. And then the second wave was Facebook and Twitter, now X. And, maybe the next wave has been Snapchat and TikTok. I think there's another wave. I think we're going to see something we haven't seen necessarily before. I think there is even in the way that we work professionally now with platforms like Teams, for example, and Slack, we are experiencing ways of communicating and sharing information efficiently, even to the point where some people don't even use email anymore in their working day. They're just using these conversation tools, which is 5 years ago to say to someone, you don't even use email in your working day, you'd be like, what? That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what I'm betting on, if you're asking me this sort of what's next, the next big thing, I'm not sure it might be here. We're just not necessarily aware of it, or it doesn't have critical mass yet. Because I think the Snapchats and TikToks and Facebooks and Meta are doing everything they can, X are doing everything they can to iterate and stay relevant. We talked about relevancy earlier. They're doing whatever they can in the AR, VR space, the whole 9 yards. And there's going to be some interesting things that come from that. But I think as we move into a different kind of world of communication and a different way of sharing content and the security around that, when we talk about identity and how we want to manage that moving forward, and the fact that maybe cookies will go away and people aren't tracking you anymore, but how are we navigating this space? That's where I'm interested. I think there's something in this world that is going to be different, and I don't think we're aware of it yet. And I think the current suite of platforms are really going to struggle to remain relevant. I really do. I think X is an example of a platform where advertising dollars are being pulled left, right, and center right now, and I don't know if they can turn that around.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a whole separate podcast, but no, that's a super interesting take though, basically, that like none of them. I mean, that's basically your answer is none of them. But something else that doesn't really exist yet, or maybe is, 3 people in an apartment right now.
100%.
Like building code. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And we should
last
revisit this
one
in 5
on our
years.
list here.
We should revisit it in 5 years.
I was going to say,
what was it?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Because it's going to be something, right? It has to be. The world's not sitting still.
No,
that's super interesting. Well, this has been great. I want to be respectful of your time. So thanks so much for being on, Jessica. I guess to close out, how do people get in touch with you? How do they learn more about your agency?
Absolutely. They can reach out to me at any point. I'm at Bread and Butter, and my agency website is www.bread, B-R-E-A-D-N, butter, B-U-T-T-E-R. We didn't get the and butter. We weren't able to buy that. That was disappointing. And anyone can ping us on there at hello@Bread and Butter at any point and talk more about what we do. And we'd always be open for a chat or a cup of coffee. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks again.
You're so welcome, John. Thanks so much for having me on. It was great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Project. If we referenced anything in terms of links, etc., they should be in the show notes. Make sure to subscribe so you get all the episodes in your feed. And if you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating or review, that would be super helpful. Last but not least, share this with a friend or a colleague that you think might get value out of it. And I will see you on the next episode.